everybody, and welcome to the story time with Practical Astros. I'm Christa of Practical Astros, and today we're going to talk about Leo. This video will be a little different than videos prior to here, where I am recording the separate description video about the different tarot cards that we're going to look at before we go into the conversation with my special guest, Taalumot. So if you want to jump right to that conversation, I'll put it in the show notes, the description of the timestamp that you can just jump to. But if you would like to join in and just a quick 10-15 minute description of each of the cards, you can do that with me. So we'll go there. I'll go ahead and share my screen. I like doing these descriptions, one, because I feel like it was prompted by a client of mine who is visually impaired and felt a little incapable of accessing the tarot images because she could not see them. But even if you're just listening to this on a podcast, you can imagine them. Sometimes just using the words to describe the images themselves kind of helps ground into the conversation that Taal and I will get into later. So yeah, with that, we're going to look at Leo 1. Leo 1 is represented by the Strength card. The Strength is the number 8, and the decan ruler of Leo 1 is Saturn, which is represented by the World card in Tarot. So with the Strength card, we have a daytime card. So the background is predominantly bright yellow, and we have a female figure wearing a long white gown. She has flowers in her hair. She has flowers around her waist, kind of trailing down, almost like a belt. She is standing in front of a lion. Now, earlier depictions of this card showed a man who had kind of conquered the lion with force, with brute strength. This interpretation, painted by Pamela Coleman Smith, uses compassion or understanding or patience or other forms of strength to depict it. But if you would just imagine the fortitude that it requires to tame a lion, whether with brute strength or with compassion, there's a lot of strength just kind of implied, having a human having her hands around the mouth of a lion. So that's what we see. There's a lion with a male lion with a full mane, curly tail. He is looking up at the female figure, tongue out. She has one hand on his snout, one hand under his snout. So the look on her face is pretty peaceful, and the whole card kind of has a softness to it, but it does imply that there is some tension here. One thing that I really enjoy about this card is the lemniscate, or the figure 8, the infinity symbol that is above her head. You see this symbol in a few cards in Tarot, most famously in the Magician card, which we'll get to later. But also, when we look over at the World card is represented by Saturn. There are 2 lemniscates on the top of that, on the world's oval and the bottom of the world's oval. So what we have on the World card is a hovering figure, nude, female. She has like a purple scarf cloud figure kind of twirling around her. She's holding 2 white wands, one in each hand. Each of them are tipped on each end with a white tip. And she is surrounded by this laurel wreath looking oval. At the top, we have the red ribbon lemniscate, and below her feet is also another red lemniscate. So it's, Saturn as the world kind of shows us the limits and the boundaries. And just having this infinity symbol at the beginning and the end, it reminds me, this is the very last card in the major arcana. After this, we return back to the Fool and then the Magician, and the cycle keeps continuing. So it's kind of for me, a nod to the endlessness of Tarot. Okay, so we have 4 figures in each of the 4 corners of this card. We have up on the top left-hand side is a male figure on a cloud, suggesting Aquarius. On the top right-hand figure, we have an eagle in front of a cloud, which suggests Scorpio. Below that, in the bottom right, is a lion's head surrounded by a cloud, suggesting Leo. And on the bottom left is a bull's head surrounded by a cloud, suggesting Taurus. So these are the 4 fixed signs in astrology, and they kind of anchor this last card of the major arcana for Saturn. So now that we have the 2 rulers, Leo as the sign ruler and Saturn as the decan ruler, we look at the minor card or the pip card that we see in between is the 5 of Wands. So we have a daytime card. There's blue sky, kind of muted blue sky in the background. All the figures are one sort of neutral ground outside. It's fairly nondescript. We have 5 characters, 5 male figures. They're each dressed in different colored clothes, and they each have a wand in their hand. Now, the chaos between all the wands, it looks like a game of pickup sticks. Each of the 6 is kind of pointing in a different direction. There's one character kind of in the middle that's engaging with, it seems like, all of them. And it's a card of kind of struggle and strife and chaos, but there is an element of play here. So it's not a necessarily just war time card. It does kind of suggest some sort of competition, could be playful competition. So these figures are all in their youth, they're all young, and so even though they're fighting each other with sticks, it doesn't necessarily suggest that it's all bad. Moving on to Leo 2. So we still have the strength card as Leo. We have Jupiter as the decan ruler, and we have the 6 of Wands for this middle decan. So looking at the Wheel of Fortune, similar to the World card, we do have 4 animals, each hovering in clouds, anchoring the 4 corners. We have the Aquarius angel male figure up on the left. We have a Phoenix or Scorpio figure up on the right. On the bottom right, we have a winged lion, and on the bottom left, we have a winged bull. Again, all suggesting the fixed signs in astrology, really anchoring the card with the endlessness of time, similar to the world. Now we have the wheel kind of constantly spinning. We also have a sphinx, a blue sphinx with a black and white striped mane, holding a sword sitting at the top of the wheel. We have a red kind of carnelian colored Anubis or dog-headed man circling up from the bottom of the wheel up to the right-hand side. And we have a yellow serpent descending down from the left-hand side towards the bottom of the card. Within the wheel itself, it is a golden disc, and it has the letters T-A-R-O. It says Tarot. You can read it in another way for Torah, which means law. And we have sigils crossing it like spokes. So from there, we'll go to the 6 of Wands, which is a much more peaceful card compared to the 5 of Wands earlier. We have what looks like a victor, someone who has maybe won the competition or the battle in the 5 of Wands. We have one single figure mounted on a horse, holding up a wand with a laurel wreath attached to the very top of the wand. He himself is wearing a laurel wreath around his head. The horse is a white horse with a green cloak that covers the entire body of the horse from the neck down. So it feels very royal, very regal. Behind him, you can see a couple of faces, maybe of the previous combatants in the 5 of Wands, and they're each holding up a stick. So all the wands are pointed upright. There's some sort of order. There's some sort of celebration, some sort of momentary peace. And from that, we move to the last decan of Leo, which is the 7 of Wands. So again, we have Leo as represented by the Strength card. We have Mars as the decan ruler, which is represented by the Tower. And we have the 7 of Wands featured here in the middle. I'll start with the 7 of Wands. So again, it's daylight. There's a muted blue sky in the background. You don't see any sort of landscape behind it. It's a single figure. You don't see any body part of any other character in the card. It's just him. And he is wearing a green tunic, yellow top, kind of orange tights and orange boots. He is holding one wand at a diagonal angle, using it almost like a shield and a weapon at the same time. He's facing out towards the viewer of the card, but he's also facing the other 6 wands that are upright in front of him. So it suggests some sort of discord again, that he's engaged in some sort of action, maybe the potential of a new battle, but he is elevated slightly on ground above the wands, And so the theme that you might have the upper hand in this card, even if you are in the middle of strife. It's not an easy card necessarily, but that makes sense because Mars is the decan ruler. So if you look at Mars as the Tower card, we have the Tower as the feature image on this card. Clearly, we have it coming up from a rocky crevice, and then the Tower is built straight up all the way to the top of the card. We have a couple of clouds. It's at nighttime. The entire background is black. There are some gray clouds on either side of it. And at the very top, striking figure is the lightning bolt coming down from the top right-hand side of the card, most likely from the heavens or the universe, coming down and striking the very top of the Tower. Where it's striking, there are flames, and then there's also a yellow crown that is being jettisoned off the top of the Tower. So the lightning striking it and exploding the Tower's top off, including the crown. There are 3 windows that are featured in the Tower. They each have flames coming out of it. And then there are, I believe there's 22. I actually haven't counted them right now, but there's a handful of what are called yods. They're these little flecks of yellow, flecks of energy. The idea that Mars breaking things up and kind of releasing energy, that's what those yellow things are. You can imagine them as being little flicks of flame, little flicks of fire kind of coming out of the Tower. There are 2 human figures falling out of the Tower head first. The one on the left has a red cloak and blue suit of sorts, silver and white tights and shoes, just heading hands out, hair and robe kind of whipping in the wind, heading towards its death, or at least towards the ground. The one on the right is also all dressed in blue, has red shoes, has his hands pointed towards the ground, as both of them are going directly south. But this character on the right has a yellow crown on his head. It looks kind of like a jester's crown. And so, yeah, that's the Tower card. Thanks again for listening to the descriptions of the cards. I hope it is helpful to you. And for now, we will go to the conversation that I had earlier with my friend Taalumot about all 3 and what the meanings of the 3 decans of Leo could be. I hope you enjoy it and stay tuned.
Good morning, everybody. Mercury is in Leo and it's on the ascendant of my chart right now at this location. And I have my very special friend, very honored to be calling Taal my friend Taal. And I won't go too much into adorations of him, but I do adore you a ton. And I'm really...
Well, I adore you too, Christa.
I'm really just pleased that you joined me today to talk about Leo. You can talk about your Leo qualifications on Speaking About Leo if you want. But you're here, so you belong to talk about Leo as far as I'm concerned. So do you want to share a little bit about yourself, your place in the astrological community, kind of like your offerings that you do, really anything you want, and then we'll dive into the Leo decans.
Sure, I would be happy to. And I'll end with my Leo qualification. I mean, as you can see, I'm fairly qualified as it is, yeah. But my birth chart also qualifies me. But we'll get to that. My name is Taalumot. You can call me Taal. I offer spiritual practice advice for householders. And what I mean by that, you can explore more on my website if you like. But basically, I mean people who are balancing the ever upset balance between spiritual practice and the mundane, if you will, which I always say in a context that incorporates its astrological meaning. That is to say, the worldly. And so, you know, my stuff is not for people who are running away up the mountain to seek enlightenment. It's for people who are living in the thick of it. And I also offer astrological services as a way to help get through the everyday. And my sort of core practices are horary and electional astrology, which I consider sort of to be different applications of the same basic astrological disciplines and traditions. So, you know, Hellenistic astrology informed by the technical advances of the Islamic era. But my horary practice is in the sort of John Frawley, Adam Ellenboss is my main teacher, sort of, more, let's call it modern spiritual, like innovations on top of the horary tradition.
Yeah.
I'm happy to talk about any technical aspects of that. I do also offer some natal and transit readings, mostly still grounded in the fundamental thing about astrology that leads me to horary and electional, which is just like the sky, the omen of the sky, the things that are really happening in the real solar system as a not merely symbolic or intellectual like sign for people, but as actually a deeply interrelated like spirituality of place and orientation to place. And knowing where you are in space time, which I know is like symbolically right there for you too, in the way that you relate to your practice, orienting yourself, knowing where you are in the universe is sort of the key to finding meaning and answers. And so in that same vein, I do offer like natal transit readings to help you orient yourself in space and time. But really what I do is just like look up at the sky and see what's going on.
What's funny is like we're talking about Leo and like the joy of the sun, which rules Leo, is in the ninth house. And you're like, this is not top of the mountain. Like it's all third house, like joy of the moon. Like the moon is literally over your shoulder. So like how do you relate with that third ninth house axis?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to expound upon my Leo credentials. The thing that you need to know about my Leo credentials is that they're in the 8th house. I'm a Capricorn rising Saturn person, but I have Venus Cazimi at the 30th degree of Leo in my nativity, and I also have a Leo 2 moon. So just outside of the beams of the sun, like at like 3, 4 in the morning, it was a really beautiful crescent moon the day that I was born. So I relate to all of these Leo themes and have like deep, like it's deeply part of my personality, the Leo nature, but it's in this dark house place. And it's, the 8th house, we don't need to talk too much about my own chart in this conversation, which is really about Leo, the place, but it is after all, it is me. I am the Leo sun here. But the way that I've always related to those placements is in service of others, really. And in good and bad ways. It's like they're, as we'll talk about, I'm sure, the decans of Leo can be pretty tough places. And they always have to do with sort of being seen and the relationship to others. And so adding in these 8th house qualities of both like debt and legacy and end death, like there are ways in which Leo makes me very concerned about how others perceive me, and that has an intrinsically worldly quality to it. I think it's why my practice is so relational.
Yeah, and especially a balsamic moon over there in the 8th, in the sun's temple. Let's dive into it if you don't mind.
Sure.
I'm going to share this. I think this works. And I'll do full screen, folio. Taal and I were chatting just beforehand, and I was saying how I was most kind of nervous to talk about this because I boiled it down to like, I want to do it justice. And just that word justice kept coming up. And the Rider-Waite-Smith and a few others of the, contemporary tarot decks at the time, they switched justice in the strength card. And I feel like there are some there's like an antitia between those two cards. There's like this secret connection. And the strength as the Leo card in the tarot, it has this, calm demeanor, but it's this tension point. The reason why you would have strength is because you're faced with something a little difficult. You don't, you don't develop muscle, in times of peace. That muscle usually becomes flaccid, and just that tension of Leo is just pronounced through all of the 3 decan cards shown here. But we can talk about just the strength card in general, or we can talk about the world, which I personally love this card. This card is Saturn. I am a day chart, so I have a different relationship with Saturn than maybe others do. But just the fixed signs represented in the four corners of the world card, just kind of creating the stability, but the figure itself kind of being suspended through this cycle of time. The lemniscape of the ribbon that's tying above and below, similar to the lemniscape of above the strength character's head. These two tension points, the sun and Saturn, as being oppositional to each other, which is Saturn's nature. And then in between that, we have the exciting, competitive, violent, but maybe playful Five of Wands. So do you want to pick a card, any card, and start talking about it?
Sure. I mean, I think the world is, I mean, all these cards are super meaningful to me. I'm a very Sun Saturn person. You know, it's ironic that Leo 1 is the one decan in Leo where I don't have any planetary placements, but I'm still deeply connected to that place as a Saturn Sun person. But I think the card that makes the most sense to start with is the world, because that's what we were already talking about, right?
Yeah.
You know, the mundane in the astrological sense. And the thing that's really important to me about this card is that it demonstrates the cyclical nature of the journey, right? And there's interesting things to say about the differences between like a circular journey and a spiral journey, where it's never the same twice. There's always like a growing outward that's happening. And that's, you know, there's some really popular animations that get shared around the astrological world of like what the solar system really looks like moving through the galaxy, and that it is a spiral that's moving in a particular direction. But that said, the sort of orbital nature, the returning themes of, you know, birth, life, and death and rebirth, you know, that's it is a cycle. And so that's what the end of the tarot, if you will, has always demonstrated to me, is like coming back to the beginning and starting over again as the Fool. And that casts the Fool in a different light too, right? As the Fool knows more than the Fool lets on. And this is why, because, you know, the whole journey leads right back to the starting point again. And that's a very solar theme too, right? Like the sun is the constant. It's the one that defines the plane. It's the one around which everything else orbits. It's you know, always moving at the same speed. Never turns around like the other ones do, except the moon. You know, it's the and the cycles of the year, you know, particularly for us tropical astrologers, the cycles of the year are defined by the sun, and the sun's return to the cardinal points are these pivotal moments. And so that's really the interesting thing about the dignities of the sun, I feel, is that you've got the exaltation of the sun is in Aries at the point at which like the light begins to dominate over the darkness. And then the domicile of the sun is here in Leo, in the center of the hottest, brightest time. And that's like, that cycle is definitive of like experience under the light of the sun. And so that's why I feel the world is a really Leo card, despite being the card about everything.
Right. And also like Saturn provides that edge.
Sure.
You know, it provides
defines the cycle.
that container, because without Saturn, the sun wouldn't feel as sunny.
Yes.
You know, you need that foil, you need that edge. And just, you know, as I've been thinking about Leo, the theme of centrality has just really risen over and over. And, you know, maybe as someone that has more Leo placements than I do, maybe that's a common word that you've meditated on or focused on, but it really kind of struck me over and over about, like, you know, this, if you just imagine the sun at the top of the chart and casting down all of its light, like the point is to illuminate and to warm and to be constant, and just that fixed nature of the light with Leo. You know, its idea is to get to cast as much light as possible, and Saturn is there to kind of just define that. And it's like with all the decan rulers, like if you look at something that doesn't initially feel like it belongs, like, you know, Mercury and Taurus. It's kind of like,
Mm-hmm.
what's that all about?
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, this is the sun's temple. Saturn's there as a guest, and there's something that Saturn has to offer the sun.
Mm-hmm.
Some sort of structure, or some sort of parameter, at least. I like parameters more than structure, because I don't really feel like Saturn gives us much structure. I feel like Jupiter gives us more structure than Saturn. Saturn just provides puts the hand up and can just say, like, no, just stop here. That's not very structural. It's just giving you the bound. So I mean, just Saturn as that ruler here. What is it that Saturn has to teach or offer the sun? It's like, as the traveling guest, it's got some sort of a skill that the sun can use, and that skill is then reflected in the Five of Wands. How do you see that?
I think that the key word for Saturn in relation to the sun is opposition, right? And that's the Saturn opposes the sun in two places, right? Like there's the Aries Libra exaltation fall axis, and then also the Leo Aquarius domicile thing. Like the Saturn is always there on the other side, and I think that, you know, there's something beautiful about the opposition too, you know, like this, even just in the sun and moon's own relationship, you know, the point of opposition is also sort of the point of maximum beauty and visibility. And it's like they're defined in relationship to each other.
Right.
And that's the thing, that's the relationship I feel the sun and Saturn have. It's almost like the sun needs something to shine upon in order to be the sun, and not just to be, you know, a cold star off on its own. And Saturn sort of defines this plane in which the sun's light is in relation to others and reflected off of their faces. And that is meant to take the sun down a peg as the sun is not the only thing out there. But without that relationship, the sun couldn't be the sun to anything. And that's part of the sun's job.
The sun requires the audience to kind of be the sun.
Yes.
Otherwise, it is just that spiraling star in space that no one's paying attention to.
Yes.
And that's when maybe the sun is a malefic.
One among thousands too, right? Like that's the thing about the sun is that it's our star. You know, like we have relationships with many stars on this planet, but there's only one there's only one that's here with us.
Yeah.
And I think that it's almost like the Saturn is the one saying, this is our shared space with the sun.
Yeah, that's a good point. So how do you reconcile this relationship, this tension point, this opposition with the imagery depicted on the Five of Wands? It's the Lord of Strife, but Susan Chang talks about, like, but at least they're striving. Like, it's the act, you know, the wands, the fire, the act of striving. It's not just like depressing strife.
Right. Yes. Yeah. They're trying to do something. That's the thing. The overwhelming feeling that the Five of Wands has always given me is like one of struggle, but not conflict so much. It's just like they're trying to build something, or they're trying to erect some structure. And it's not going great. Like, you know, the laws of physics are working against them. Gravity always wants to pull the structure downwards, but they're working on it anyway. And I think that is the that tension, opposition. The key word for opposition, I don't even know whose keyword this is, but like every aspect has its sort of, you know, keywords about what the sensation, if you will, of that aspect is. And to me, and I'm sure I got this from someone else, opposition is tension. That's the balance point, the maximum like distance that also is, it's both as far as these bodies can get from each other and the point at which they can only get closer. And that tension is how things are built. And so Sun and Saturn need to be in tension with each other in order for in order for the structure to keep striving to come together over and over again every time it cycles.
Yeah, I had a conversation recently with another astrologer, and she likened, oppositions and conjunctions being not dissimilar to each other. And if you look at just like the story of an aspect, two planets in aspect to each other, that tension point is like that full moon point. It's like it's like your eyes are across the dance floor, but they're locked into each other.
Yes.
And so there is a very deeply personal connection, very personal line of sight, but it's like from very far away from each other. So perspective is there. With this card, it's always looked like to me that they're trying to make a star shape. It's always come up of like, they're trying to figure out, how do we make a star? Because it looks like, yeah, they could be fighting, but they could just try to be figuring it out.
Yeah.
And so it's not always like the Seven of Swords has like scampy, like warlike to it way more than this Five of Wands does.
Yes.
I pull this card fairly regularly, and it's always like, okay, well, what's that grit around which the pearl aggregates sort of card? It's like, okay, there's something to move forward. And I appreciate just that push, because the Four of Wands that precedes it is like it's union, it's Mars and Venus. It's, there's some stasis, very beautiful. You have to, with those fives, you always have to kind of like, all right, now what's next, sort of a thing.
Yeah. Something that I often talk about, I'm realizing as we talk about this that I don't get to talk about tarot out loud that much, which is really fun. Something that I often, and like, reading is when this will often come up, is when you have to get into the sort of gendered qualities of energy. And this was actually something that I was also thinking about in terms of the sun itself. Like we live in a time of like beautiful deconstruction and reconstruction of a lot of, you might call them like orthodox beliefs embedded into cultural and religious structures about like the roles of gender and the genderedness of things. And I enjoy a lot sort of picking apart the things that are sort of like alchemical precursors to the human concept of gender. A lot of people will essentialize them and go like, this is the divine masculine and this is the divine feminine. I see it very differently from that. I see it as more like there are various kinds of sort of spiritual polarity embedded in the universe, and gender is one of the human descriptions that arises out of certain configurations of those things. And so anyway, that's all to say, like the suits of the tarot. And one of the beautiful things about the structure of the tarot is that there's 4 suits, right? There's a continuum, there's a spectrum built in to the way that it describes reality. And so you like the fire and water, the wands and cups, sort of represent the opposition points, if you will, the like most extreme on either end of the spectrum. And one way that I describe to people that say that I'm reading tarot for, the difference between the sort of the side that is called masculine and the side that is called feminine, is in the way that the stories are different from 1 to 10, where the feminine suits, and again, I'm just using these words because of the conventions around them. The feminine suits, earth and water suits, go from 1 to 10 in a way that goes from like empty to full. Right? Like 10 is sort of the fulfillment of those elemental qualities. And so the 5 point becomes like this sort of midpoint. Whereas in the masculine suits of air and fire, they build from like inception to like explosion, right? Like the 10 is like the point of overwhelm and destruction in both of those suits. And so the 5 becomes this critical pivot point where it's going from like potential and excitement to like maybe a little too much. And so here at 5 is where this fire element that we're here to really talk about the essence of is like wobbling on this point of inflection.
It's like the bendings of the story.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. I'm going to go to the next card unless that felt like a great way to move on to, well, at least we get this.
Now we're in my chart. Now we're in parts of my chart that I can talk about from experience.
Yeah, this is like I'm sure printed and put on like a family photo wall in your hallway. Yeah, what's your experience? We can talk about the wheel. Wheel is one of my favorite cards ever, ever, ever,
Yeah,
ever,
same.
ever.
It says Torah right on it.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm just partial to Jupiter. My rising sign is Mars ruled, and Jupiter and Mars are conjunct. So I just feel like I have some sort of kinship to the Wheel of Fortune. But let's talk about the Six of Wands, because this out of the Four of Wands and the Six of Wands have this kind of temporary peace.
Yes.
But it's the Lord of Victory. So if we're going on the continuum after the five, like one of those boys kind of got an upgrade, got better clothes, and it got a horse with his own clothes, and is now kind of like marching through a little bit elevated higher than his combatants below. But just being Jupiter, Jupiter is of the day sect, Leo is domicile as the sun. It feels like there's just like this amplification. This is kind of the top of the wheel, at least for me. But how do you, if your moon is in this, how is your embodied experience with this card?
Well, it's something I'm always seeking. But the lesson of it is always that this is as good as it gets, right? That's the sort of the flip side of this 1 to 10 thing is like this point of we got past the middle is sort of the ultimate victory of this fire element before it becomes consuming. And we know what's coming next. The Seven of Wands, like this guy is already beset by enemies now that he's sitting on top. So there is this sort of like king of the hill quality that I really recognize throughout my life. And like victory is a feeling that I really cherish. The moon, my moon is in Leo 2 here, and it's the ruler of my descendant also. So there is a really, this decan for me is really about my relationships and the feeling of like triumph in connection is like the defining thing of like, it's almost like that's my friend sitting on top of the chair, right? It's like that's how I feel about that person, is like they're my hero. Then, relationships, inevitably the wheel keeps turning, and like, we that feeling is fleeting. But it can always be recaptured through relationship. Like this is what the strength part is about to me, I think, is like sort of persevering through these cycles until, then like the next turn of the spiral, we can sort of learn and grow from the last one.
Yeah. And that image of the spiraling sun going forward, not just being a stationary, two-dimensional kind of merry-go-round, it is moving forward. There is some sort of a three-dimensional shape to it.
Yes.
And Rachel Pollack's book, she mentions this King Arthur legend of the night before a battle. King Arthur dreamt about a king being crushed at the bottom of a wheel. And it like harkens back to these pagan rituals of crushing a king every year, this time of year, to sacrifice to the goddess, so that man is temporary, but the goddess is eternal. And just the wheel itself is like, you're either up the wheel or down the wheel, but as long as you're on the wheel, you're here. And riding that, and fortune relating to the moon, not just like luck or lottery. It's like you can have bad lottery, you can have bad luck, but just understanding that these cycles continue. And honestly, I would like to see an animation of the Wheel of Fortune go hurtling through space like the sun.
Nice. The spiral of fortune.
Yeah. Now, can we talk about fixed star Regulus?
Yeah.
I wanted to talk a little bit about it. It's the heart of the lion, and it's not exactly in the space in the sky that it's in a, why don't you talk about it, because I feel like you have better language about it, but just fixed star Regulus is a very regal. It's like the most regal of the royal stars, and yeah, I'll give you the stage for it because I want to hear your words on it.
We, as a generation, the old people like us,
Mm-hmm.
are blessed to have lived through the ingress of the fixed star Regulus into another tropical sign. When I was born, the star was still in the tropical sign of Leo,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where my at the the 29th degree where my sun and Venus are. And I also have Mercury and Mars like very early in Virgo. So there's the sky. You couldn't see it because it was daytime and the sun was out. But if you look at like an astronomy picture of of the sky at the moment of my birth, it's like there's the sun, Venus, Mercury, and Mars like all clustered around Regulus. And
holding court.
yeah, and so it's the way that I relate to that is not as the Regulus figure myself. This has, I think, to do with sort of my Saturn ruled nature and my eighth house Leo nature. And we can talk. We were talking about Jupiter before. I don't want to like get completely chart dox myself and get into all of that. But like the role in my role in life has been to sort of be around the king, not to be the king myself. And so like that's like I see like the Leo sun nature of my personality is very clear, I think. And like I'm a visible and public and loud and gregarious person. But in the sort of bigger picture, I have always been of service to a brighter star. And that's like there are ways in which that has played out. I mean, the most obvious well, there's a lot of obvious relationships in my life where this is the dynamic. The most lasting one is the one with my wife, who is a rabbi. And so like I relate to being a rabbi's husband as like a role, like a Leonine solar role unto myself, with her as the Regulus, as like the the real ruler of the, and that's like not great imagery for like a rabbi's role in a community. Well, it is in some communities, but not in our community. She's not like wearing a crown and strolling around like the queen of the universe,
right.
But in my heart she is.
In your heart, yeah.
Yes, exactly. And that is the nature of Regulus like being right there for me, and having like so many placements clustered around it, has been about like always remembering, not even needing to remember, like being constantly aware that like as like as sovereign of a being as I am, like I'm in service to greater sovereignty. And there's like that's a very like resonant Jewish feeling for me also.
Yeah.
The thing that, but Regulus is also a great place to go down my favorite rabbit holes about astronomy and astrology, and talk about the tropical versus sidereal zodiac, because obviously like, yes, Regulus is the heart of the lion in terms of the image, the constellation Leo. And that's not the zodiac that I use in my practice. So to me, the stars are precessing through the zodiac. And because it was at such a like inflection point when I was born in this like Leo Regulus way, like, a few years later, it crossed the line into tropical Virgo. And so now it's like because I have placements all the way through the second degree of Virgo, it's like Regulus is transiting my natal chart in a way that can be felt. There's like eras to it. It's not moving very fast, but it's like these planets are all so close together that like that transit can be felt. And so there's like a shift in an era that happens where like the Virgo Regulus era that we're now in is really when I have begun to figure out sort of the details of my service, as opposed to the Leo Regulus era where it was just like, rock and roll, look at me. Like now the real world has come calling, and that like Virgo Mercury is the more Regulus of my placements now.
Well, detailed service is like very Virgo coded right
Yeah,
there.
totally. But that's my ninth house, right? So like, it's like these things are taking place in the joy of the sun now. And and so I got, man, my chart is such a good demonstration of like whether so many of these controversial traditional concepts are real, right? Like combustion and Kazemi, and like is my Venus Kazemi or is it combust? Like I'm here to tell you that my Venus works. And so it's not like so I'm like a big, but it is also within 17 arc minutes of correct of exact. So it's like by the strictest Kazemi definition, like Venus is definitely Kazemi. But then there's the other question of like, are Mars and Mercury combust, being like only 2 degrees from the sun, ahead of the sun. And I my experience has been Mars, yeah, maybe a little bit combust. But I don't think anybody would talk to me as a Virgo Mercury and relate ninth house Virgo Mercury and relate to me as a combust Mercury person.
Right. Well,
So
is that because like so it's crossing the sign boundary, so it's like challenging that idea that does combustion and like work across the sign boundary. But
right,
then you have Mercury in his own chariot, so is
right.
he protected from that? And day chart Mars, combustion, right there. But it's ruled by that Mercury, right?
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
in its own chariot.
And
So it's
conjunct too.
yeah. So yeah, complicated. Mars Mercury is an energized Mercury for sure.
Yes. Yes. Right. It
And
does have that. But then there's
and
also Regulus now. Like I'm getting this
right.
Regulus transit. So it's like
Right.
who knows who's responsible for all of
Well,
this.
I think that like service to something greater than yourself, I
Mhm.
mean, all the fixed stars have like the myths around them that have their own tension points. And pride, at the fall of pride, it goes into falling off the wheel. If you're at the top of that wheel and pride comes before the fall, and if you abuse the position in Regulus, if you
Mhm.
use vengeance, I was reading about this recently. If you use vengeance against other, if you have Regulus configured to your chart, that's when the dark side basically comes back to get you. And
Oh
so
yeah.
doing it in service to other really does kind of help protect you, because it's jettisoning forward. That's not looking back. Like you said, the sun doesn't look back.
Mhm.
It's not looking back trying to cast these rays of vengeance. It's just moving forward.
Yeah. I this is so true in my life too. And like I don't want to get like too deep into the deep personal details and biography part, but like there have been a lot of Regulus figures in my life. My wife is not the main one. And like remember my chart here, brave astrologers. My wife is signified by the moon, the Leo moon here as my descendant ruler. So it's like she's got other Leo roles in my life besides this Regulus thing. There have been much more like distant kings in my life that I have served. And the thing I've taken away, I've been like very privileged to be part of the sort of responsibility and power that figures like that have, and like the ability to make an impact on things. And every time I have served in that role, the primary takeaway has been that is not for me. That is not my chair. I see like that person is being burned up by that visibility, and like and they're you know taking it as well as they can. Like they understand their responsibility. I understand my responsibility, and my responsibility is not to get consumed by power, but to serve in my way, and then you know move along to the next
Yeah.
job.
Yeah, to be that close to it, and then to glean the best lesson without having the personal injury to yourself.
Yes.
Because that's something that you can't be unburned by that sun, by that
Mm-hmm.
exposure, by that illumination, however you want to call it. But to be just behind the curtain seeing the stage, you can choose, be like, I'll pass.
Yes.
Or
Yes.
I'll stay right here behind these curtains. Thank you very much.
When I was, there's probably a lot of good natal astrology to do about this, but when I was in high school, I was always in the tech crew of the plays. Like the plays were like a big deal in our school. And I liked the music, and I, you know, like I knew the songs. But I was always, it was hilariously on point. Actually, I was in charge of the lights. I was the one shining the lights on the actors. And that was the role that I wanted to be in, was up in the booth with control, but making the other people look good. Because like being out there on stage with the ability to fail and look bad was not my thing.
Yeah. Before we go on to the final card of this decan, I was reminded of I watched The Walking Dead when it, like, as it came out, and I don't remember all the characters' names, but there was the one character. He was a black guy with long dreads, and he had the tiger, whoever that guy was, and he was like the ruler of his little kingdom that traded produce. But he was kind of caught up in some of the kind of basically the mobster tribes in The Walking Dead. But at one point, like, his mission was that he wanted to revamp this theater to play a movie for the children. And even though like the world had already ended and there was just destruction on either side of it, when I think about this card here, there's kind of like tension and hardship on either side of this card. But at this center moment, this character who had very like big cat energy himself, literally had a big cat, and his motivation was to project entertainment for the children, to give them a temporary, momentarily non-zombie apocalypse day where they could just be lost in kind of the dream and the creative dream world of what once had been. And I'm not a big Walking Dead fan. Like, I could give two shits about it, but it's like these little threads of myth that kind of pop up even in popular culture. I was like, that is so like Leo too. Like, it's momentary, but it's like, you know, just enjoy that horse ride, because you know you're going to have to get off and fight again. You know, Mars is coming. But in the moment, we can have laurel wreaths, we can celebrate, we can ride pretty horses. You know, we're at the top of the wheel just for a little while. And I don't know why, like, that I was like, why did that memory come up? But again, like, in doing preparation for these things, I pay attention to those little omens everywhere, because there's reason why that is stored in my brain somehow from watching Walking Dead so long ago.
I feel like I know exactly why, and it points out to me that something we need to do in this conversation is talk about the difference between lions and tigers.
Oh yeah,
and because as you and maybe some other people know, the tiger is sort of the avatar of what I do online, and I have very important sort of planetary rulership concepts about tigers versus lions, but it's a Leo 3 thing that we need to talk about, which is a bit of foreshadowing of what I'm talking about in terms of planetary rulership of tigers.
Well, let's go there. I mean, I love lions, but I have a son, and when he was born, he brought tigers to me, and tigers is just him. And in Chinese astrology, he has the tiger in a few places in his chart. You know, you have your day stem and your hour stem and your year and your month. So I'm curious to hear like because you have, like, I associate the tiger with you. So yeah, how do you relate it to Leo 3? But more importantly, like, how do you differentiate between the two big cats?
Yeah, man. Well, I don't know any of that Chinese astrology stuff that will show me like what my tiger placements are, and I'm very excited to find that out from someone. But the tiger, obviously, like that well, maybe it's not obvious, but the tiger was not first. The tiger was not my first symbol. The lion was. I mean, the first time I like identified overly with a big cat was a lion, because somebody told me what Leo was, and I was like, oh yeah, sure, that's a lion, I'll take it. But the tiger came to me later through other traditions and practices. Also, there's a vacuum cleaner going on outside of my door. I'm sorry if that is picking up. Okay, great.
It's just a tiger growling.
Yeah, there's just like a growling beast out there. So maybe it's on point. So the tiger avatar that I have online comes from, and you have surely noticed, and many other people have probably noticed, that I'm not the only tiger. I was not the only tiger in my sort of pod of tigers online. That pod was organized anyway, around a practice that we all sort of adopted, that we found out about on, early pandemic, sort of what do we do to like take care of our bodies, spirituality Twitter, of a Chinese Qigong form, tiger Qigong form, that we all sort of learned to do. And it like settled in really deep as like some fundamental thing for us all about like how we move and live, and became a core part of our practice. And so I became one of several tigers. And, I don't lay like personal claim to the tiger at all. But the tiger has really come to define my spiritual practice in a lot of ways. And the differences between tigers and lions in terms of personality and behavior are many. Like tigers are not pride animals. They're very solitary. They're camouflaged. They're not like showing off in the sun like lions are. And the lion's role, as many people learn very quickly in like any study of like animals, male lion behavior is somewhat ceremonial, right? Like male lions don't actually do a whole lot. And so that like lovely shaggy solar figure is just kind of for show. Whereas like tigers are like all work basically. Yeah. And so I've been holding this off long enough. My assertion is that tigers are primarily ruled by Mars, and are martial figures, and like maybe like things are not single planets, sun Mars, let's say. And so in that sense, as somebody with the sun at 29 plus Leo and Mars at 0 Virgo, like I am a sun Mars person. I had like there was a Mars Kazemi in the first day of my life. So that sun Mars nature is the thing that I associate with my sort of tiger practices, and it's almost an entirely different sort of job from my Leo lion role that I have. And it's very solitary and personal. But of course, this last decan of Leo is like super martial. And there are more Mars things in my chart that sort of incline me towards this, but like that part has, while it doesn't show up publicly the same way. It is sort of my driving sort of force and practice. And so it does inevitably come out. And so that's why, at this late stage of my career, like writing about spirituality online is something I've done for a really long time. And, if you go to my site, you'll see that the archives go back to like 2010, because I've been sort of dragging all these blog posts about meditation and stuff along with me wherever I go. And that's the tiger stuff, right? But the tiger face and like this whole Taalumot character, like that's a very recent development. And so it was almost like the tiger was sort of hiding in the underbrush through the whole like lion phase of my life, and then pounced on me a couple of years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like true to fixed fire, like I remember when because I asked a few people, I was like, what's the deal with the tigers? Like everybody has tiger as their avatar, and you explained it to me, but for true fixed fire, you're the one that has sustained that.
Yeah, that's true.
You have carried that forth the longest. So it's almost like there's this selective quality with fixed signs of like when you choose for a very long time. And that's part of, Leo, is that fidelity to self and others, that is like that responsibility of the sun, and Mars there to either break it up a little bit, but honestly, I think to just propel it forward, to just keep it going.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, continuing to chart docs myself, like the Leo placements are the only planetary placements in fixed signs, unless you count outers, but let's not go there. And but I have, you know, I'm one of those 11th house, 5th house axis MC people.
Oh, yeah.
So I have the MC in Scorpio. So that's sort of like, that's been a big part of this tiger identity thing, is that this like Mars that's like closely conjoined the sun, and like the sun will conjoin in the sign of Virgo like the second day of my life, is my MC ruler. And so that has something to do with like the visibility of this martial tiger nature for me. Though of course it's currently hidden by the sun. So, you know, it's all there in that story. But then also that means my IC is in Taurus, and my ruled by Venus, Cazimi, and Leo. So like I'm a very fixed person, despite having like this cardinal ascendant, and you know, doing a lot of stuff. I definitely stick with things once I start doing them.
Yeah. Something you mentioned about like, you know, your wife isn't like parading around with a crown on her head. And when you said that, I was imagining the crown at the tower, like the danger of doing that,
Nice.
of parading around with a crown on your head. And I remember this story in high school. I went to high school a very long time ago. I'm older than you. And so I feel like extra old, like talking of a reminiscent story about my high school years.
When I was in elementary school.
Yeah. But there's a story of this grandma on a train talking a story about this boy that won all these awards, and he was kind of parading around through the village wearing his awards, and the whole town was very proud of him. And then a listener on the train heard the grandmother tell the story to the child or the children, and he was like, actually the true telling of that story is like, yes, he won these awards and he paraded proudly through the village, and a tiger heard the clanking of his medals and came and devoured him.
Nice.
And I like both of those as like, that's the problem with visibility, especially in this modern solar celebrity focused, you know, leisure class culture. You know, we give illumination with our own eyes to figures, and we're very easy to bring them down. And the tower here again, like Mars as the guest in the Leo temple and the sun's temple, what does Mars have to bring? There's action, but there's also just, you know, crashing down, because what comes after the tower is the star. And we don't get the star unless we have those tower moments. So, you know, I appreciate I just like Mars and Leo. You know, I've always felt like it's like a very potent channeled way for Mars to express itself.
If I had been born 2 hours earlier, I would have Mars and Leo.
Wow. Yeah.
But I don't.
But you don't. You know, as a Mars and Virgo native, I'm glad to offer, you know, you a cup of tea in our intellectual tent. So, so do you want to talk about the tower card just in general, or
Well, so one thing I was thinking about was how it relates to the Saturn part that we were talking about at the beginning, and like what's the difference between like the Saturn Sun relationship and the Mars Sun relationship, or the Saturn in Leo and Mars in Leo. Like the tension is the word that we were using for that opposition for the Sun Saturn relationship, and Mars is like the threat. Like that would be the word that I would use for both Mars, but also, you know, I was saying tension in terms of the aspect, the opposition, and the aspect that's of the nature of Mars is the square, right? And so that's the word threat, I think, applies to at least many manifestations of that aspect. So the malefic sort of part of the solar realm, it works in concert. Like there's the ever present tension, the Saturn part of the threat, the acute threat, Mars, of like the toppling of the king, of the knocking off of the crown. But that's, like we were saying before, like that's the thing that keeps the whole thing in balance. You were talking about these ancient rituals of like ceremonially killing the king, right? That's the kind of thing that's necessary to like sustain like the homeostasis of like order it's not like you can't have like eternal order. It has to constantly churn. And Mars is there to like chop off that head and like make like cause it to regrow again.
Yeah. I mean, Mars requires blood. It requires sacrifice, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and magical practices, especially, it's like that is the price of entry. And, you know, I mean, you know, what is order if it's, you know, just a pause in the chaos? Like chaos is ever looming, you know,
Yes.
against our best efforts. Um, you know, and you know, I look at just the energy released with Mars here, you know, those yods, those little flecks of yellow that
Mm-hmm.
coming out of the tower. You know, I I I I don't have like, I'm not a planet hater at all, and I have every reason to hate Mars. You
Uh-huh.
know, he's just
That's how
he
he
gives,
likes it.
yeah, he gives me more moments of fuckery than Mercury, and that's saying something.
Uh-huh.
But it's like, but it only exists because that's that square, that break in between the stasis. And um I was talking to my sister a couple of days ago, and she has a master's in counseling from Pacifica, and so she's coming from a Jungian background. And I had written this thing of the tension point between, you know, being a creative person and basically being an artist for life, and then looking at like the things that I value versus like how they're valued with coins, you know, and that
Mm-hmm.
tension point of like basically money and art, and how they don't really have to be opposed, but they are kind of on the spectrum where there's this tension point. And she said that at least in her experience of study, you know, holding those two tension points is, you know, like you start there, you hold those two tension points, and then where you collapse, that's where you kind of dig into a little bit deeper, because that's your opportunity for transcending those tension points.
Mm-hmm.
And immediately the tower sprung into mind of like,
Yeah.
the collapse is so gorgeous, because like
Yes.
there's your chance to let it come down, because you've built it up and it has been unsustainable. Like that kind of building is just totally unsustainable. You're building a super, you know, erect tower on like this impossible mountain that probably Capricorn can't even climb. Like, come on. Like,
Yeah.
that's not the way to do things.
Maybe Mars and Capricorn can climb it, but no one
yeah,
else.
yeah. Mars and Capricorn would try.
Yeah.
But just that point of like, you've gone too far. You know, Mars here in Leo, maybe just bringing it down again, so that humility can return, because there is that tension point of, there is pride with Leo, but there is so much humility with Leo too. And I feel like Mars is there just to be that reminder. It's not easy. I mean, like the Seven of Wands here, like he's got a pretty distressed look on his face. He is momentarily got the upper hand, being above all the other wands. And he's fully prepared both with a shield and weapon of that one singular wand. But it's not an easy card. You know, all the Leos, all the fixed decans are not very easy.
No.
You know,
Yeah.
and it takes a lot of strength and fortitude to sustain the light at whatever part of the year the fixed sign is. And I think that's what makes it strong. That was what makes it fixed, is the fact that there are challenging things. You know, Leo gets Saturn and Mars.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Who else but the sun would take on both at once? The with Jupiter's help. The thing about the Six of Wands, or sorry, the Seven of Wands that we were just talking about, was that it comes right after the Six of Wands. That like that victory moment is so temporary, and then you're surrounded by enemies. Like that's the quality that this card has always had for me. Like, oh God, not again. And like like I thought we just made it. Like I thought we just reached the top. And the other thing that I was just thinking about is the phrase tower moment. You know, like I feel like there's a sort of like a cliche that has developed of tower moments as like referring to this card as like things that happen to people all the time. And like I do think that tower moments happen all the time, like being toppled from your impossible thing, like happens all the time. But I think, like you have laid out very carefully, like there are actually a lot of particularly acute qualities to a tower moment, or even to a tower responsibility that can lead to a tower moment. You know, like I think that not all moments that we describe as tower moments are really tower moments, because it's like, really, have you put that much work into the place that you have attained, that it became like impossible? You know, like that's the tower moments are few and far between, really, which is not to say that like only some people have them. Like, I do believe we all have tower moments in our lives. It's just like the ones that we need to save our strength for, the ones that really are worth this fight, this Seven of Wands fight, are the ones that we have put the effort into to get to that place. And that, like, lots of other things, we might like sort of cling to them as like important edifices in our lives, but like we didn't really build that up all that high. Like, we didn't have to climb up like that high of a mountain in order to build that thing. And we should probably just like let that crumble and you know, like keep walking.
Yeah, it's probably more of like a Four of Cups moment, where like a couple of glasses tipped over and we're just like pouting, even though there's like an invisible, disembodied hand is like, we're like, here's another one.
Yes.
Yeah, I think you're right. You know, I use the word tower moment a lot, just as a day chart, you know, being careful with Mars. You know, Mars has been integral of putting me in the hospital a few times at this point. And so if I do pull the tower card, I learned this trick from T. Susan Chang of, I took a class with her, and then she wrote about it in one of her books. When she has pulled the tower card, she has crawled headfirst down a flight of stairs, and then got up and said, the requirements have been fulfilled, and I have done that. It's like, if I pull it, it's like, if you need that symbol of me just, you know, being humble and embarrassed in my neighborhood, crawling down my front flight of steps, I will do that to absorb that energy so that I don't have an actual tower moment. Yeah.
You sort of raised a quality of tower moments that I think is a very important sun word that we haven't said yet, which is shame. Right. And like there's like, the tower is like a pride thing. And so, like, before the tower moment, and so that there's like an associated shame with like this thing, this visible thing, like crumbling. And that is also, that's a Saturn word, right? I would say. And so that Sun Saturn tension of like pride and shame is just part of the human experience. And it's like, it's kind of the thing that the sun goes through, right? It's kind of the reason the sun cycle is so mythologically and symbolically significant to us, even as it is like purely like an astronomical phenomenon that has like obvious material manifestations. It's like the whole earth follows this sort of cycle of pride and shame, that the sun gets to this like peak of its power that we're talking, like the sign that we're talking about here, and then it like falls from there and goes into the darkness. Like that is the sun's nature. And so like the tower moment is every year for the sun, but it's you know, it's kind of like the thing. I mean, we've talked about this in so many different ways and in so many different astrological relationships. I really just think it's just sort of the nature of the universe that like the sun, the light doesn't mean anything without the darkness, and vice versa. And so the tower moment is really kind of constructive in a way, because it's the moment that this tension is enacted and the darkness is shown and the shame is felt, that like creates the contrast with the pride and glory and everlastingness of the sun's, at least, appearance.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at just the tower card is dark, and what that electricity, that lightning bolt, you know, is that coming from Zeus? Is that coming from Jupiter prior? But it's releasing all of that energy, that primordial energy. You know, it's getting rid of the trappings of the crown and just bringing back the fire. And so, yeah, I mean, you know, the other piece of creation is destruction. You know, destruction is in itself a creative act, as I have learned with my son, who has Mars conjunct the ascendant within just a very few minutes.
Mm-hmm.
His creation is destruction, and destruction in, you know, peaceful ways. He's still a Virgo sun,
Mm-hmm.
but you know, it's like that is it's not just night and day. It's like just it's the dark side of that sun,
Yeah.
you know, which is also is still part of that body. We just don't see it.
Mm-hmm.
But it is integral. It's inextricable from the side that we do see.
Mm-hmm. Well, we see it in shadow, right? We see it on the other side of the earth, when we face away from the sun is when we see it.
Yeah. And I'm reminded of just like eclipse moments, like when you can visualize and see an eclipse, like it is unnerving.
Yeah.
It's so like charged, because you can see, like, you know, one of my favorite things is just looking at the shadow that the trees and the leaves make of, you know, these lunar shapes, you know, from the sun. It just feels like all this alchemy happening at once, like with my own eyes, and the shadow and the physical bodies of the luminaries, and then the physical bodies of the trees, and then the light rays themselves. I mean, it's like seeing them simultaneous. You kind of see them in that union. So yeah, I feel like we've torn Mars down to a palatable, constructive way.
Yes, we've done a Mars to the Mars.
Yeah. Any final words just on the Seven of Wands? I mean, the card that comes after this is one of my favorite in all of tarot. I love the Eight of Wands so much. My lot of spirit is there. That's probably why. But it's just like onward, you know, there's like this movement. And but to get there, you kind of have to still triumph. It's almost like this guy, he won this momentary battle, got to ride a horse, and then fell off the horse, and like you said, like, fuck, again, like I just got up there.
I mean, I want to leave the Sagittarius to the Sagittarius suns, but it is worth pointing out that my chart ruler is in Sagittarius, and I have you know, a deep fondness for that feeling of like regrouping in the woods after all of this. You know, it's a, you know, as Leonine as I am, the moon is not like it, and it's balsamic moon that you mentioned, like, you know, I'm at the end of a lunar cycle, but the trine to Saturn and Sagittarius is what's actually the imminent contact. And so there is more I'm already thinking about moving on to the next thing and regrouping after the tower moment, you know, even going into it. So like that's the thing that you know, healthy Leo has, is like the rest of the sort of fire trine, like, you know, balancing it out. And as you know, I also have Jupiter and Aries, so I have this grand fire trine, and like without this whole sort of recycling of the elements, you know, I can see how any one of those placements could really be too much, because, you know, Saturn and Sagittarius all by itself, like you could see me sitting in the middle of the woods with the campfire, not wanting to go back too. So, you know, it's all, fire is an alchemical process. You know, this thing about sun and moon that you were just describing in the eclipse, you know, having just been under the totality of one of these, you know, it's like the fire goes out and then comes roaring back, and that's just the nature of fire. You know, I use the word roaring there without even thinking about the fact that we're talking about the big cat here, but that's just it's an ever hungry process, and like consuming the fuel is part of how it does what it does.
I heard this interview with Laura Krantz. She wrote she's written a couple of books, one on Bigfoot for kids, which is really great, but she talked about fire just as a, you know, is fire you know, a living being? Like what is life? You know, fire is life. You know, fire requires fuel. It dies, it has kind of its ashes, it consumes, it takes up space, you know, all the like, how would you define life? Like, is it just carbon based? Well, it's like, well, you know, like, how is fire fed? And just the idea of fire as being that alchemical life that really is the center of our whole existence, you know, as the sun, an ever-changing form. But Leo, just as that, when I think, you know, you like to build fires.
Sure do.
You like to build fires outside and fireplaces, and just the beauty of building a good fire, that alone as like an act of devotion to the spirit of fire. I've always appreciated about you. But just the types of fires that hold and that warm and you know, can prepare food, but also just holding that energy is just such a beautiful, magical act in and of itself. Do you want to speak on that to close us out?
Oh yeah, I always want to talk about that. I mean, that is my essential sort of magical practice, I guess. And you know, like I just finished saying, like I'm a very fire heavy person, you know, astrologically and otherwise. And but it is the fact of like having all parts of that cycle that make it possible for me to work with this element, as opposed to just like burning myself or burning other people, right? Which are all qualities of the places we've been talking about, and you know what happens in their excesses and things like that. But yeah, the quality of warming and of hosting and of cooking and of all those things, you know, that's sort of the thing that I feel blessed about having like an Aries fourth house for. It's like I am a big believer in the fireplace and in the hearth and in the, you know, the home being centered around the element of fire. But it's always in, you know, like the fire's role is to nourish and to warm, not to destroy, you know, like like that's, if anything, like I'm lucky that my Mars is so hidden by the sun, because like I have never used fire for any destructive purpose, and I never would, you know. I've used it to burn things up, right? To get rid of things that are not serving anyone. But that's part of the process. That's part of the alchemical process of like of starting the cycle over again. And that is you know, the reason, like, yes, the sun is moving ever forward through the galaxy, right? But the way we experience it here is as a light that grows and shrinks and grows again. And you know, that flicker, you know, at like, and even at like this the speed of from day to night, like the fire in our sky flickers like a fire in our home does. And it's not just of its own nature. It's about like the shadows all around it and the way we sit around it. And so that the importance to me of fire, you know, like I've talked about all these domestic ways that I use fire, but that really the thing that I do with fire that I feel is most important is convene spiritual community around it. And you know, our community, my wife's community, we meet around fire a lot of the time, and the fire is sort of the central organizing principle. And I delegate this duty to other people a lot, because I feel it's very important for other people to hold this role. But like, I sort of am the administrator of who is in charge of the fire. And then it's often me. And like, I take that role more seriously than, like, I mean, I don't want to compare, but it's like, you know, I'm a father and a husband, and I have this householder role of like keeping the fire going for these people and feeding them and warming them and all of that. But I also provide this fire for the greater community around me. And it's you know, it's reminding me of things that we talked about, gender and all that stuff. And there's so much more we could talk about there with the sun and masculinity and, you know, all of these things. But like, that's a big part of my work, you know, is like is understanding the masculine and working with the masculine. And my work in my community here, like my local community, it's like, that's a role that I've taken on, is like, how do we warm without burning with that fire? And you know, it's like this very fatherly principle to me, that I just try and keep at the right temperature for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, being the beneficiary of being around one of those fires, I say that you do a really good job of it.
Thank you, Christa. It's been beautiful to sit around your fire with you and talk about fire so much.
Yeah. Well, I will say that I have not been responsible with fire all the time. As a kid, we would make fire bombs with tennis balls, kicking them down the road. I mean, it was like, I thankfully was never burned. So I'm much more careful around it because I have not had such a respectful relationship with fire. But I do enjoy, I'm always the one that kind of gets down into the pit to build, because I love the building the structure of fire and watching, giving it enough air to breathe, but not too much that goes out, and experimenting with different shapes. And I was out in Northern California at family's house, and it was being house set by a woman named Harmony. It's an elderly woman, and the Santa Ana winds came through, and it was very, very, very cold. And so I just kept the fire going just so that we would have warmth, because the electricity was out. And after a few days when we left, her last words to me were, "I'm going to miss your fires." And it was such this, like, to have someone else notice that how you build a fire, I feel like it's like this very, very honorable thing to be told. Especially if you hold it with pride in yourself of being a steward of that, to have it be noticed, to have it be seen, you know, it's an honor. So the fire in me loves the fire in you.
We didn't say the word compliment at all in this conversation.
Oh no.
And to me, like, Leo's love language is compliments, and the like being seen that way. And there's no, if just is future reference for anyone who I happen to talk to in the future, there's no greater compliment that you can pay to me than to admire a fire that I've built. And so I feel that, Christa, and I'm like very glad that you have received that Leonine honor before.
Yeah. Well, my North Node and my MC are in Leo, so I have points there. But with that, we will end. I'll stop my share. Do you want to tell people again, like, where to find you if you want to be seen?
Sure.
By the public, and
yes.
Then we'll close out.
You can find everything that I do at my website, which is Taalumot.Space or Taalumot.com, whichever you remember. Taalumot. And that's my username on everything too. So you'll find me there, and you'll find out all about what I do astrologically and otherwise. I'm one of the fires that I keep, that Christa sits with me around, is a community called Base. That is a members only campfire for householders on the internet, that, you know, I show up to and toss some logs on every day. And everyone who feels like that would be a warming opportunity is invited.
Yep. It is a magical space that is like the best meme generator for my own mind. I love
Christa is also sort of the leading memer of the space, and I can't wait to sort of figure out if I can even like stop staring at these things that you've made to describe it. I'll figure out something to do to the world with them.
Yeah,
T-shirts,
I feel like I should,
posters, billboards.
I should spend a little bit more time. But the beauty of memes is just like how quickly they're put together, you know? So I'll put your website and how people can get in touch with you in the show notes. But again, thank you so much for joining today, and we'll say goodbye.
Goodbye, Christa. Thank you for having me.
Of course.